talked about the fact that truth does exist. And remember, we're doing this in 5 points. We're starting at truth, and we pointed out that truth does exist. We asked the question, does it exist? Because we had to ask the question, because if there is no truth, as people in our culture today say, then this book can't be true, right? Today we're going to talk about, does God exist? Again, this book can't be a word from God if there is no God, right? So we have to give evidence that God exists. In a future worship service, we'll talk about, are miracles possible? Again, this book can't be true if miracles are not possible. It's filled with miracles. And in the modern university today, in the modern world today, people don't think miracles have occurred, and they think that they're impossible, or that you shouldn't believe in them. So we have to deal with those objections. And then we'll look at the question, is the New Testament true? And the reason we're looking at the New Testament is because if the New Testament's true, the Old Testament's true. Because in the New Testament, if Jesus really was God and he taught the Old Testament was the Word of God, mark it down, it is. Okay? And then we're going to answer the question, so what? And one of the reasons we're doing this is because 75% of our young people are leaving the faith once they leave the home. Studies show by George Barna, by Lifeway Research, that 75%, 3 out of every 4 young people who are brought up in the church walk away once they walk out of their home. One of the major reasons they do, intellectually, they don't think it's true. They go off to college and they're fed a line that there is no God, that you can't believe in God, that it's nonsense to believe in God. You know what they're taught? They're taught stuff like the God delusion. Have you heard about this book? This is a book written by Richard Dawkins. He's a Darwinist, evolutionist, atheist. He teaches at Oxford University. He's one of the most popular atheists in the world right now. He thinks that you, sitting here, are all deluded. And if you read this book, you realize, no, maybe he is deluded. We're going to talk a little bit about him and his evidence, supposed evidence against God tonight. But if you can't answer what Richard Dawkins says, and most of the kids that are brought up in our churches can't, they're easy prey to the atheists once they get off to college or once they get out in the real world. So we have to deal with this issue. All right, let's talk about and briefly review what we covered last time. We talked about truth. What is truth? If we're going to talk about does truth exist, we have to define it. And we said truth is telling it like it is. Truth is what corresponds to reality. Truth is what corresponds to its referent. We talked about the law of non-contradiction that helps us discover what is false. It's built right into the nature of the universe. You can't think without the law of non-contradiction. An example of something that would be contradictory would be to say the earth is both round and not round at the same time and in the same sense. We all know that's nonsense. It's either round or it's not both, right? The same thing is true with regard to religious claims, where Lee Strobel might say God exists, Richard Dawkins says he doesn't, but both of these claims can't be true, right? And we ask the question, well, which one of these individuals is right? And we said, of course, Lee is right. But we're going to give evidence that Lee is right. That's what we're going to do tonight. We also talked a little bit about the fact that all truth is absolute, that something that is true for all people at all times in all places. There are no relative truths. And we said, however, when you say things like this, you get a lot of objections. You remember the objections we get? There is no truth. You can't know truth. All truth is relative. It's true for you, but not for me. No one has the truth. And you ought not judge anyway. So why don't you Christians just shut up? Okay? And we pointed out that the way to show that each one of these statements is false is to show that they violate the law of non-contradiction. And this little tactic of applying the claim to itself helps us do that. We pointed out that an obvious self-defeating claim would be for someone to say, I can't speak a word in English. If someone had said that, you'd say what? Hey, you just did, right? And we pointed out that this is the Roadrunner tactic. In the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we talk about how this reminds us of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. Because Roadrunner gets away from Coyote by stopping short of the cliff. Coyote goes blowing by him. For that split second, Coyote has the question mark over his head until he realizes what? That he has no ground to stand on and he plummets to the ground in a heap. That's exactly what you can do when people utter self-defeating statements to you. You can show them their claims have no ground below them and the whole argument collapses. So when someone says there is no truth, you say what? Is that true? Right? You're applying the claim to itself. Now this has the added benefit of making you look like a super genius. We also talked about this claim. It's true for you, but not for me. The answer to that is what? when you apply the claim to itself. Yeah, is that true for everybody? You see, because if it's true for everybody, that it's true for you but not for me, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Right? Once again, this is a self-defeating statement. We also talked about how you ought not judge. They'll throw that at you, and the response to that is what? Isn't that a judgment? Yeah, it's a judgment. They're judging you. We pointed out that everybody makes judgments. You'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. And oh, by the way, Jesus never said don't judge without qualifying it. He said, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first. Then you'll be able to more clearly see the speck in your brother's eye. Notice he's not telling you not to take out the speck from your brother's eye. He's telling you to do that. He's telling you to make a judgment. So this command is not a command on not to judge. It's a command on how to judge. And we pointed out that there are many verses in the New Testament that actually command you to make judgments. In fact, atheists make judgments. They make a judgment that there is no God. They make a judgment that Christians are deluded. They're making judgments just like we do. And they're the same narrow, exclusive judgments that we make. Truth, by definition, is narrow. Everybody makes exclusive claims. Everybody makes narrow judgments. Atheists do, we do, everybody does. You'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. Then we pointed out that the summary about truth is that contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything's true, but everything can't be true, and objective truth can't be denied without being affirmed. If somebody says there are no objective truths, you ask them what? Is that an objective truth, that there are no objective truths? Because if it is an objective truth, then it defeats itself. If it's not an objective truth, if it's just your subjective opinion, why should I believe it? Right? So there is truth and you can know it. Now let's add one other thing. There is a so what here. Sometimes you'll show people that there is truth and you know what they'll say? So what? Whatever. You got your thing, I got my thing, whatever. Is it really a whatever? Who cares about truth, they'll say. You know people like that? I mean, Al just said, let's pray for people who are not Christians. There are several people that you might have thought about. And even if you could show them that this book was true, they wouldn't care. Right? I don't care. I want to do my own thing. So what? Let's answer that question. Actually, everybody cares about truth, even if they say they don't. Let me give you some examples. Everybody cares about truth in almost every area of life. For example, everybody cares about truth and safety, don't they? I mean, when you got an airplane, you want to know what? That the pilot's not drunk, that the engines have been properly maintained, the pilot knows how to fly, right? I mean, you wouldn't go if a pilot said, if you saw a pilot about to get on the plane that he was about to take you on and you saw that he was drunk, and you said, hey man, you're drunk, you can't fly this plane. He goes, that's true for you, but not for me. Would you go, oh, okay. No, you care about truth then, don't you? You also care about truth when it comes to money, don't you? And everybody does. You don't want, if you got a broker or somebody, you don't want your broker to just steal money from you, do you? You want the absolute truth, and you want his absolutely true advice. You don't want him to lie to you, do you? Or suppose you think you got $5,000 in your account, you go into the bank teller and say, hey, I want my $5,000 out. The bank teller says, sorry, you only got 50. And you go, no, I really got 5,000. If they say, hey, it's true for you but not for me, you don't go, okay, that's fine. No, you want truth there. You also want truth in medicine, don't you? When you go to a doctor and you think you have diabetes and the doctor prescribes you sugar instead of insulin, you don't go, hey, that's fine. Or you go for an operation and the doctor says, you need a surgery. And you go, well, why do I need a surgery? He goes, well, I don't know. I just feel like operating. Or he doesn't diagnose you. He just brings you in the operating room. And you say, well, why are you about to cut me open? He goes, well, I don't know. I just feel like it'd be true for me to get a little experience today. And, well, where are you going to operate, Doc? I don't know. I'll just cut anywhere. You know, when they're about to do an operation now on a particular part of the body, they mark it. You know, operate on this knee, not this knee. Why? What's happened? People have operated on the wrong knees, okay? Amputated the wrong limbs. You want the truth when that happens, don't you? You don't just, whatever. You don't just say whatever. Oh, if the doctor, he cut off my wrong arm, but that doesn't matter. It's true. It was true for him this was the right arm. You also want the truth in advertising, don't you? If it's supposed to get 30 miles to the gallon and you buy it and it gets 10, you don't go, well, that's okay. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they lied to me. No, you want truth. You want truth in relationships, don't you? You don't want your spouse just to be relatively faithful, do you? You want the spouse to be absolutely faithful. And you don't want the spouse to tell you the truth 364 days a year or be faithful to you 364 days a year, right? You want 365 days a year, right? You want the absolute truth at all times. You also want the absolute truth in transportation, right? Although driving around Charlotte, you wouldn't think so, right? I mean, how many different roads are named Sharon around here? Or Queens? I mean, you don't, didn't I just turn off Queens? I'm back on Queens. How did that happen? I don't know. But you want the truth in transport. You want, when the sign says this is the way to get to Charlotte, you want that sign to tell you the true way, don't you? You want truth there. You want truth everywhere in court proceedings. You want the absolute truth when you're on trial. You don't want the witness to get up there and say, I swear to tell the whole relative and nothing but the relative, so help me future experience, right? You want the absolute truth told, don't you? You want the absolute truth in every area of your life, so why not in religion? Why do we bifurcate and leave truth out of religion, but not any of these other areas? Because we've bought into the idea that religion's only about faith and everything else is about fact. That's nonsense. Religious claims are often claims about fact, and we're going to show you what some of those claims are. In fact, truth matters in virtually every area of life. Think about it. Think about all these things that you run into, all these dangerous things you might run into in life. The bridge is out. You want to know that, right? You want to know whether there's a shark in the water, or there are landmines, or there's an alligator, or there's a dog that's about to rip your leg off if you cross the fence. Well, if all these truths matter to your temporal life, that's important. But if Christianity is true, it matters to your eternal life, doesn't it? By the way, if any world religion is true, it matters to your eternal life. You know, Christians are often, we're often condemned for having the only one way of salvation. You know, just about every major world religion is exclusive in that regard. Muslims think that if you're not a Muslim, you're going to hellfire. Surah 5:33, the Quran. They're just as exclusive as Christians. And Hindus think that we're all caught in a cycle of reincarnation that we can't get out of. Atheists think, they exclusively think that we're all going to become worm food when we die. At least in Christianity you have a choice. In atheism you don't have a choice. You're going to become worm food. That's it. In Christianity, you can either go to heaven or hell. You choose. There's more choice in Christianity than there is in atheism. But just about every worldview is exclusive, and all truths are exclusive. They are. The only question is, what's the right truth? Is Christianity the right truth? Is Islam the right truth? Is atheism the right truth? Is Hinduism the right truth? What's the right truth? Glad you asked. Let's go. Does God exist? We know there's truth. We know it matters. It matters in our temporal life, so it must matter in an eternal life if there is one. But does God exist? A theistic God, a God who created the universe and sustains the universe. And before we do, we need to define what we mean by a theistic God. If you look up here at the screen, there are three major religious worldviews. There's theism, God made all. You see the world and the hand holding up the world. God made the world, He's holding it up now, He's sustaining it. That's theism. That's a theistic God. The next major religious worldview is pantheism. God is all. You see the hand in the world? God is me. God is you. God is the rug. God is the grass. God is the trees. God is everything. That's a New Age pantheistic God. The third major religious worldview is atheism, no God at all. You just see a hand, you just see a world, you don't see any hand at all. The world is self-existing, it's always been here, it came into being by some means we don't know about. That's atheism. Now you can pour most major world religions into one of these three worldviews. For example, theism, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam are theistic worldviews, okay? Under pantheism, you've got Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, and the New Age. You know Zen Buddhism. Use the Force, Luke. That's all Zen Buddhism. The whole Star Wars series is Zen Buddhism. There's a good force and a bad force out there. They're not personal. They're just out there, kind of like gravity, and it'll help you if you tap into the right one. Okay? And then, of course, atheism, religious humanists are atheists, and they are religious. In fact, let me point out here that everybody is religious. I don't care whether you're an atheist. I don't care whether you're a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Christian. You're religious. Why? Because religion, if you define it as somebody's explanation for ultimate reality, how we all got here and where we're all going, then everybody's religious. Atheists have an idea about that. They think we came here through natural selection somehow, and that we're ultimately going to go to worm food. There's no afterlife. That's a religious viewpoint. Of course, you know our religious viewpoint, that we're created by God, we fell, and God came to save us, and by trusting in Him, He'll pay the price for our sin rather than ourselves, and we can therefore be in eternal bliss with Him forever. Most other religious worldviews, particularly theists like Muslims, believe that there's some sort of works that you have to do in order to merit your way to heaven. But everybody's religious. By the way, everybody's a fundamentalist too. How many times have you been accused of being a funny-mentalist? That's it. You've been accused of being a funny mentalist? We look crazy to the outside world, don't we? Christians, we just look nuts. And they accuse you of being a funny mentalist. Well, there are some Christians that do give us a bad name. That's true. But everybody's a fundamentalist. Everybody has fundamentals. Atheists have fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? There is no God. We got here by natural selection somehow. We're all going to become worm food in the end. You don't have a choice. You're just going to die, and that's it. And oh, by the way, don't tell me what to do. Okay? Because there is no ultimate morality. Those are all fundamentals. So the question isn't whether or not you're a fundamentalist. The question is, do you believe in the right fundamentals, the ones that are really true? And by the way, everybody also has faith. Atheists have faith. They have faith that the whole universe exploded into being out of nothing, but no one did it. We'll see that here in a minute. They just have to have a lot more faith than we do, the atheists. You'll see as we go through this evidence, they have to have more faith than we do. So everybody's a fundamentalist, everybody's religious, and everybody has faith. The only question is, do you believe in the right fundamentals? Are you believing the right things about ultimate reality? And how much faith do you need to have to believe this? We'll see. I don't think you need all that much. Here are the three great arguments for the existence of God. The first is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. The second is the design argument, known as the teleological argument. And the third is the morality argument, known as the moral argument. And we'll explain each of these as we go. We'll start with, of course, the cosmological argument. And we're going to spend more time than we've done in previous nights here. We're going to talk about how the cosmological argument says everything that had a beginning needs a cause, or had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, premise A, everything that had a beginning had a cause, right? Everything that comes to be has a cause. That's pretty self-evident. We know that. That just seems to make sense. Seems to be the way the world really works. Things don't come into existence out of nowhere. There's always a cause for them, right? You're not just driving down the street and somewhere out of nowhere, a car appears in front of your car, no driver, no cause. I know many a police officer has heard this, but it's not true. There's always a reason, there's always a driver, there's always some cause behind that car getting in front of yours, right? So we know premise A is true. What about premise B? The universe had a beginning. If it didn't have a beginning, like some atheists might say, it's eternal, doesn't need a cause. But if it did have a beginning, then it needs a cause. We're going to show that it did have a beginning. If it had a beginning, then the premise follows, or the argument follows, therefore the universe had a cause. Did the universe have a beginning? There's only two options. Either it did or it didn't. Can anyone see any third option? No, this is called the law of the excluded middle in logic. It's either A or non-A, but there's no third middle. There's no third alternative. It either is or it isn't, right? You may have heard it put this way. You either are pregnant or you're not. Okay? There's no kind of in-between. Now, obviously, there are stages of pregnancy, but you either are or you're not, right? That's the law of the excluded middle. It applies here. Either the universe did have a beginning or it didn't. Now, here's the evidence the universe had a beginning. We're going to go through this. This is all in the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, but I'm going to give you the acronym that's in there, and I'll explain these in a minute. I'll just introduce them now. It's the acronym SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. The R stands for the radiation afterglow discovered by Penzias and Wilson. We'll talk about that. The G stands for great galaxy seeds, and E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. You say, now why are we doing all this? Because it all points to God. The conclusion points that there's a God up there, out there, who created us and sustains us. Again, everything we do points to Christ. All right? Now, let's talk about how some of this evidence points to a big bang. Christians don't need to be afraid of the Big Bang. People always say, oh, you believe in the Big Bang. We're Christians, we don't. I do believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. All right? The evidence for the Big Bang is good. Some of the evidence is right here. Okay? Let's talk about this evidence, and we'll talk about the second law of thermodynamics, the S first. The second law of thermodynamics says the universe is running down. It's running out of energy. In other words, as time goes on and on, the sun is burning out, and all the stars are burning out. All the energy is going away. You guys have seen these magazine covers, Time magazine, Newsweek magazine. It'll say something like on the cover, when will the universe end? Well, they always say it will. They say don't worry about it. It'll be several billion years from now, but ultimately that sun up there is going to burn out. Ultimately, those stars, all the hydrogen in the stars is going to be used up, and we're not going to have any more energy. The universe is going to go to heat death. Now, here's why this shows the universe had a beginning. Because if the second law of thermodynamics has been in place forever, ever since the universe began, if it did begin, then, well, let me put it this way. Suppose the universe didn't have a beginning, but the second law of thermodynamics has always been in place. Would that sun still be burning today? No, it would have burned up a long time ago, right? Because it only has so much energy in it. And so if it's been burning from all eternity, it would have burned out a long time ago. Just like your car. You only have a finite tank of gas in that car, right? Suppose you got a 20-gallon tank. You put gas in it, right? How far can you go on your 30 or 20-gallon tank? Well, you know. You figure it out by the miles, right? Well, let's suppose that you put gas in that car an infinitely long time ago and had been driving it from all eternity. Would you have any gas in it now? No, you would have burned out a long time ago. Well, that's the way the universe is. The universe is running out of energy, and if the universe didn't have a beginning, all the energy would be used up today. Another way of thinking about it is think about it like a dying flashlight. If I were to take a flashlight right here and have batteries in it, and I turn the flashlight on and I put it on the podium, and we come back tomorrow for the 9 o'clock service, is the light coming out of that flashlight still going to be as intense as it is tonight? No, it might be dimmed or it might be gone completely, right? It might be dead. Why? Because there's only so much energy in those batteries. Well, think about the universe as having batteries. And it's running out of its energy in those batteries the longer it goes on. If the universe didn't have a beginning, the batteries would have died out a long time ago, right? Another way of looking at it is that the second law of thermodynamics brings things toward disorder. You see those cubes up there? Look at the cube on the left. See how nice and ordered that is? Now you look at the cube on the right. That's what nature tends to do to things. Let's suppose we took the cube on the left, the very ordered one, and we went down to the ocean, we threw it in the ocean, and let that cube tumble in the waves, okay? What's it going to look like if we pull it out of those waves, say, a few minutes later? Probably going to look like the one on the right. If I took that cube on the right then and threw it back in the waves, is it ever going to come out looking like the one on the left? Probably not. Why? Because nature brings things toward disorder, not order. Things break down. Human beings break down. You know, when you get older, you get dresser disease. That's when your chest falls into your drawers. Okay? We break down. So if the universe didn't have a beginning, in other words, it's been here from all eternity, we would have all disorder now. There'd be no order. But there's still order left, right? So the second law of thermodynamics points to the fact that the universe had a beginning because we still have energy, we still have order. You with me? All right. Let's move on to you in Surge. The universe is expanding. If time were reversed and we could watch the universe, we would see all the galaxies collapse back to a point of nothing. In other words, when scientists look through their telescopes, they can see a redshift in the light. It shows that all those galaxies are moving away from us. This is what Edwin Hubble saw from Mount Wilson Observatory in Mount Wilson, California in the late 1920s. He discovered the redshift in the light from all these galaxies. And he said, if all those galaxies are moving away from us now, and if we could reverse time, we would see all those galaxies collapse back upon themselves. So mathematically and logically, they were nothing. And then the universe leapt out of that into being. So once there was nothing, and then bang, the galaxies leapt into existence. Or I should say, the explosion, which ultimately resulted in galaxies, leapt into existence. In fact, Einstein had a hand in this, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The R in Surge stands for the radiation afterglow. And what the radiation afterglow is, it's the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. These two scientists operating in Homedale, New Jersey, in 1965, had this big horn antenna. You see that big goofy antenna behind them? And this antenna was picking up static no matter where they turned it in the sky. And they couldn't figure out where it was coming from or why it was out there. And then they went out in the antenna and they looked inside and they saw that there were pigeons nesting in this antenna, Jersey Shore pigeons. So they actually had these traps to trap these pigeons. They trapped the pigeons, they cleaned all the pigeon dung out of there, and they went back inside and they said that probably solved the static problem. Went back inside, static was still there. No matter where they turned that antenna, they found the static. What they had discovered was the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. It's still out there. It's just a little bit above absolute zero. Everywhere in the universe, it's there, the heat. To give you an illustration, you ever watching TV at night when the lights are out? What do you see when you turn off the TV? Kind of like a glow coming off the TV. That's heat coming off the TV. That's what they found from the initial Big Bang explosion. It's still out there. These two guys in 1978 won Nobel Prizes for that discovery. In fact, my parents, just about 3 years ago, moved right here to Fort Mill after living 65 years in New Jersey. Because as you know, at age 65, it's federal law, you must move south. Okay? If you live in the north, you got to move south. So they moved down here to be, of course, close to their only 3 grandkids, my 3 sons, Steph's 3 sons. And they threw a little bit of a party, friends of theirs did, for my parents before they came down here. And these people are kind of highfalutin. They had some pretty high-powered people there. And one of the persons that was there was Robert Wilson, who is the guy on the left in that picture. He's actually at my parents' going-away party. And my mom told me about it and said, yeah, that this Robert Wilson guy, he won like some sort of Nobel Prize. I said, the Robert Wilson? The guy who discovered the radiation afterglow? Mom's like, I don't know. Anyway, This Robert Wilson was or my mom said, it was kind of funny because this Robert Wilson was talking to some Jersey girl at the party, and after she was done talking with Robert Wilson, she walked over and joined my parents, who were talking to somebody else, and my mom said, hey, you know that guy you were just talking to was Robert Wilson, that, he won a Nobel Prize in physics? And the lady's mouth just opened, and she got pale as a ghost. And my mom said, well, what's the matter? And the lady said, I just told him he didn't know what he was talking about. Typical Jersey girl, right? You don't know what you're talking about, buddy. Are you talking to me? You want a piece of me here? Typical Jersey girl. Turns out now that my parents, they've moved here now. I have two younger sisters. One is 38, and the other's 43. Within the past year and a half, they have had 3 kids between them, their first children. So now, my parents moved down here when my teenage kids could care less whether they're here, right? But now all the babies are back in New Jersey. So what's my mom doing? She's going out of her mind, right? All the babies are up there. By the way, my oldest sister, she married a man who got lymphoma a number of years ago, about 6 years ago, and went to Sloan Kettering in New York, and the doctor said does not look good. But he's alive today, and he became a Christian through it. There is a miracle, and of course, they never thought they could have kids after that. But Matthew, which means gift, came in January of 2007. My sister's 43 years old. Healthy kid, big kid. It's just a blessing. It's another sign from God, isn't it? All right. Now, a lot of people, until this discovery was made, thought that the universe was static and never had a beginning, that it was eternal. Here's what an agnostic astronomer said after this discovery was made. No explanation other than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation. The clincher, which has convinced almost the last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and heat produced in a great explosion. That put the nail in the coffin of people who thought the universe was static and never had a beginning, that it was eternal. It's always been here. But there's more evidence, not just the radiation afterglow. Scientists said that if the radiation afterglow does exist, it ought to have very fine variations, temperature variations in that afterglow. So in 1989, they sent up a satellite to discover it. And for 3 years, it circled the Earth, and they looked for these temperature variations in this radiation afterglow, and they couldn't find anything. They kept looking, they kept looking. He said, it's not there. He said, look, if the Big Bang's true, it has to be there. Kept looking, kept looking. You know what they finally figured out? They were not looking precisely enough. In 1992, they fine-tuned their measurements to the point that they found that the temperature variations were so precise, they were down to 1 part in 100,000. The leader of the expedition, a man by the name of George Smoot, said, we found the fingerprints of the Creator. He said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. Stephen Hawking called it, they found the holy grail of cosmology. This is the greatest discovery of cosmology, which is the study of the beginning of the universe. It's the greatest discovery in cosmology. It may be the greatest discovery of all time. In fact, this man, George Smoot, the man I just said, he said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God, wrote the book Wrinkles in Time. And just last October, a year ago this month, he and his partner won Nobel Prizes for discovering this great, what we call great galaxy seeds. The reason we call them great galaxy seeds is because these are the temperature variations that allowed the galaxies to form. Now, the final letter in our acronym is E. In SURGE, it's for Einstein's theory of general relativity. And Einstein's theory of general relativity says time, space, and matter are correlative, that you can't have one without the other, that time, space, and matter came into existence together Once there was no space, once there was no time, once there was no matter, and then it leapt into existence out of nothing. As I've said before, Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. And the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence out of that. Einstein's theory has been proven accurate to 5 decimal points. Now, if Einstein were here today and you were to say the universe didn't have a beginning, you know what he'd probably do? He'd probably do this. It did have a beginning. If it had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. Now, Einstein, for a while, didn't want the universe to have a beginning. In fact, he called his general relativity calculations irritating. Irritating? Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, wrote, "That's awfully emotional language for a discussion about some mathematical formulas." What did he mean by that? Because scientists don't always tell you the truth. Because they don't want the conclusion that the evidence leads to be true. It's irritating to them personally. They don't want there to be a God. Einstein, for a while, didn't want that either. But in 1929, Edwin Hubble invited Einstein out to his observatory in Mount Wilson, California. And he said, "Al, come on out. Take a look in the telescope, and you will see what I see." Einstein came out, saw the red shift in the light, saw that the galaxies were moving away from us, and at that point he went, uh-oh. See, for about 15 years before that, after he developed general relativity theory, you know what he did? He put a cosmological constant in his equations to keep the universe from having a beginning. He wanted the universe to be eternal and static, so he put a cosmological constant in there. In order to put the cosmological constant, some big mathematical formula, he had to divide by 0. Now, what do you learn in 2nd grade? You don't divide by 0. But the great Einstein divided by 0. Why? Because he didn't want there to be a beginning. But when he saw the confirming evidence of the red shift in the light, even Einstein said, "I can't keep this charade up any longer." He said, "I repent of the cosmological constant. It was the greatest mistake in my professional career. I don't care about the details now. All I want to know is the mind of God." Now, Einstein, to our knowledge, never became a Christian, never even became a theist. He was a pantheist. When he was asked, "What kind of God do you believe in?" he said, "I believe in the God of Spinoza." Spinoza was a pantheist from the 1600s. A pantheistic God, as you know, is God is all. God is me, God is you, God is the grass, God is the trees. Now, that doesn't seem very logical to me. Here's Einstein's evidence pointing to a theistic God, yet personally he says, "I believe in a pantheistic God." What does that tell you? People don't always follow the evidence, do they? Even their own. Now, there's one more point about the universe having a beginning. In addition to the second law, universe expanding, radiation afterglow, great galaxy seeds, and Einstein's theory of general relativity, there's a philosophical line of evidence that the universe had a beginning. And it's called the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, stay with me on this, all right? Let's look at a timeline, right? Let's say, from your perspective, this would be history, right over here. You're looking at a timeline, right? And we don't know if the universe had a beginning at this point. Let's just say there's a timeline, and somewhere over here represents history. And as we come through history, we get to Adam and Moses and, Jesus maybe being here, and Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and all the great heroes of the faith. And you ultimately get to today. Here's today, right here, okay? Tomorrow's not here yet. When tomorrow comes, we add another day, and the timeline gets longer, right? And the day after that, we add another day, timeline gets a little longer. That's not here yet. Here's today. Question: what is the definition of an infinite? What is it? Something that has no end, goes on and on and on, right? No end. Well, does our timeline today have an end? Yeah, right? Here's today. It's got an end. So this cannot be an infinite timeline, can it? See, if there were an infinite number of moments before today, today never would have gotten here. And you can't be at the end of an infinite. So no matter how far back we go, we know that this timeline had a beginning. Whether it was billions of years ago, thousands of years ago, let's leave that question to the side for a second. However far back it went, it had to have a beginning. Because you can't be at the end of an infinite, can you? But we are today. So this is known as the cosmological argument, and it states that time cannot be infinite. And if you notice something, if you look in your Bible, the Bible even says this in several places. Let me just point out one of them. When Paul is writing his swan song, what's the last book Paul wrote? Does anyone know? 2 Timothy, exactly. Here he is in 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 9. It says, God, who has saved us, called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of his own purpose and grace. This grace was given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. There are other places where it says God is eternal. In fact, Leonard was singing a song tonight, right? About eternity. That God is in eternity. And he began time. He began time. When he began time, he began space and matter as well, just as Einstein said. All right? All right. Finally, let's point out of how people deal with this. This is Robert Jastrow you see on the screen. Jastrow is an agnostic. He's the guy that sits in the same chair Edwin Hubble sat in when Hubble invited Einstein to the observatory. Same place, Mount Wilson, California. He's in his 80s now. And he's not a believer, he's an agnostic. Here's what he says in his book, God and the Astronomers, which he wrote in 1978. And he revised in 1992. In this book, he goes through some of the evidence I just went through, the surge evidence. Here's what he says. He says, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. In an interview, he went on to say this. Astronomers now found they've painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. Now get this, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Why? Why is Jastrow admitting there are supernatural forces at work? Because he knows that the entire natural realm was created out of nothing. So if it's not a natural cause that brought it into existence, what must it be? Something beyond the natural, something supernatural. That's what the word means. Supernatural means something beyond the natural. Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, admits this. Here's the bottom line to the entire thing. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us as one of the following two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, right? Or someone created something out of nothing. Now, which view is more reasonable? No one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing? Someone, of course. Here's the question to ask an atheist. Do you have an atheist friend of yours? They say, I'm an atheist. Ask this question. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Or you can say it this way. If there is no God, why does anything exist? If they say, well, the universe has always been here, you say, surge. Second law, universe expanding, radiation, afterglow, great galaxy seeds, Einstein's theory of general relativity, and we'll throw the column cosmological argument on there as well. The end of infinite time is impossible. If you can answer those 6 lines of evidence, then maybe you can say the universe is eternal. But if you can't answer that evidence, then the best evidence points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. If it had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. Make sense? We're just following the evidence where it leads. Now you say, how do atheists respond to this? Poorly. Let me give you how Richard Dawkins responds to it. This is Richard Dawkins, right here in The God Delusion. His most recent work, just about a year old now. Here's what he says. He says, God needs an explanation. Who made God, basically? However statistically improbable the entity you seek to explain by invoking a designer, the designer himself has got to be at least as improbable. God is the ultimate Boeing 747. What does he mean by that? Because sometimes we're known to say that to believe that, say, life was created by natural law is like believing that a tornado raging through a junkyard creates a Boeing 747. Right? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Tornadoes don't put things together. They rip things apart. Well, Dawkins is trying to tell us that if you're saying that God created this incredible universe, and he admits it's incredible, he admits it appears designed, he says it's only apparently designed. We haven't even gotten to the design argument yet, but we'll do that next time. He says that, well, if you got to have a God to design it, then somebody has had to have designed God, and that's even more improbable than just believing that by luck this universe came into existence. In fact, he uses the word luck several times in the key chapter in his book. Luck! What's luck? Is that a cause? This guy claims to be a scientist. How did that happen, Richard? Well, it was luck. Luck! What's that? His main argument is who made God. Right? Look, if you ever get that question, here's how you answer it. Nobody. Nobody made God. Why? Because God is unmade. Look, there's two possibilities. Either, well, let me back up. Since something exists, something must have always existed, right? Because you can't create yourself, can you? You have to exist prior to creating anything. So since something exists, we exist, something must have always existed. There must be something eternal out there, right? Okay? So, if that's so, we have to exist to say it, so we know we exist. If that's so, then there's only one or two possibilities. Either the universe has always existed, or something outside the universe has always existed. Now, we've just given evidence that what? The universe has not always existed. Time, space, and matter came into existence out of nothing. So it must be something outside of time, outside of space, outside of matter that has always existed. That's the answer to the question. Now, Dawkins tries to go on and say, well, you can't have a simple being. And when Christians mean simple, they don't mean that he doesn't have power. It means he doesn't have parts. God does not have parts. John 4:24 says what? That God is spirit. God doesn't have parts, so he can't break down. He's not subject to the second law of thermodynamics. He doesn't have parts, and he says you can't have a simple being create this incredible universe. And why not? Why can't that be? In fact, immaterial things can create material things. Is there a difference between your brain and your mind? When somebody says, I want to pick your brain, say, you're not a surgeon. You're not going to pick my brain. What do they really mean? I'm going to pick your mind. In other words, I want to get a thought from you, right? Your mind is immaterial, even though it's associated with your brain, yet your mind can write a letter, can't it? Or write a book. So you go from an immaterial thing, your mind, to a material thing, a letter or a book. If there is an immaterial reality, then that immaterial reality, i.e. God, can create this material universe. It's certainly a better explanation than luck, which is what Dawkins essentially says. He admits they have no idea. They don't have what he calls a crane for physics. In other words, there's no system by which they know about. There's no natural way that the universe could have been created physically by any known law of physics. In fact, all the laws of physics came into existence at the Big Bang, so they have no idea. And he's claiming that we're deluded. I'm claiming that he appears to be deluded because he's not following the evidence where it leads. All right, in fact, let me point out a couple more things, and we're going to finish up here. I'm not making this up. This is another explanation from the National Geographic magazine in October 1999. Self-generating universes. Multiple universes grow like branches from a tree trunk in a model that allows the universe to create itself. What? Are you going to let some artist at National Geographic draw some sort of retarded French horn and have you say and have you believe that that is how the universe came into existence? One scientist in the article admitted, he said, it's sort of like we're brushing our ignorance under the rug of the very early universe. Exactly. You are brushing your ignorance under the rug when you draw a retarded French horn and expect me to believe that's how we got here. One atheist is very, very honest. This is Anthony Kenny, who's an atheist. He wrote this. He said, according to the Big Bang Theory, the whole matter of the universe began to exist at a particular time in the remote past. A proponent of such a theory, at least if he's an atheist, must believe that the matter of the universe came from nothing and by nothing. Exactly. The universe did come from nothing and by nothing if you're an atheist. That's not an explanation. That's not a good one in my mind. There must be a cause where that universe came from. In fact, Robert Jastrow, the guy I was talking about before, the agnostic who wrote God and the Astronomers and said there are supernatural forces at work. The very last line of his book, God and the Astronomers, says this. After going through all the evidence, this is worth the price of the book. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. Now, question. Can anybody give me one good reason why we ought not teach what I just went through here in our government schools, our public schools? Am I up here quoting the Bible to say, here's why you ought to believe in creation? I just referenced the Bible to say it's consistent with the Bible. But the evidence that I'm giving here is evidence that you can get from science books, right? So why shouldn't we teach this? Why shouldn't we teach the surge evidence? Why not? Are we imposing religion on people here? No, this has implications on religion, but we're not causing people or forcing people to worship anybody or anything, are we? We're simply saying, here's the evidence. You can draw your own conclusions as a student as to whether or not you want to worship the cause of the universe. That's your decision. But I'm simply showing you evidence that this cause appears to be out there. Look, if we can't teach creation, then we can't teach Aristotle, because he believed in an unmoved mover, or Plato, or we can't teach the Declaration of Independence, because it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their Creator. What, is the Declaration of Independence unconstitutional now? What do you think Thomas Jefferson would do? The man who said taxation without representation is tyranny. What do you think he would do, and the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, what do you think he would do if he were to come back to America today and find that his taxes were going to pay public school teachers to teach his kids that his own Declaration of Independence was in effect unconstitutional? What do you think he'd do? He'd start the Second American Revolution, don't you think? He'd say, we failed in the first one. Not only is his Declaration of Independence true, now modern science shows it's true. And yet, we're getting wrapped up in stupid debates with evolution and creation when we ought to just say, let's just look at the surge evidence and let the students make up their own minds. All right. That's the cosmological argument. Next time we'll get to the teleological argument and then the moral argument, and we'll take it right on out. We'll talk about miracles, we'll talk about the New Testament, and then we'll get into the book of Romans. All right? Since this is a smaller venue. If anyone has any questions, we can take a couple minutes for questions. Then I'll turn it back over to Al. Any questions? Okay, good question. He's saying, why are we saying the universe is running down if energy is constant? The first law of thermodynamics says that the total amount of energy in the universe is constant. Total amount. You may have heard it stated this way: energy can't be created or destroyed. That's not true. That's a philosophical claim. It's not a scientific claim. It's saying that the total amount of energy in the universe, if it's not getting energy from outside, is constant. What's changing is the ratio of usable energy to unusable energy, okay? The total amount's staying the same, but it's like watching your gas tank go down, okay? Or, yeah, from your perspective, it'd be this way, right? As the gas tank goes down, the total amount of energy is, say, the capacity of your gas tank. But your usable energy is going down, down, down the longer you drive, okay? But the total amount stays the same, all right? So the first law simply states that the total amount of energy is constant. The only thing that's changing is the proportion of usable to unusable.
What is unusable energy?
Unusable energy is the energy that's been used up that can't be created or can't be used again to the same degree that it was used the first time. For example, when you drive your car, you could collect all the stuff that comes out of your exhaust pipe, right? But it's not going to be, you're not going to have as much energy as you started with because you've used some up. Okay? In fact, today, or even to this day, the U.S. Patent Office will not issue a patent for a perpetual motion machine. Why not? Because it knows the second law of thermodynamics won't allow something to be perpetually in motion. Okay? That it ultimately is going to run out of energy. All right, I think we've gone long enough, right? We're running out of energy now. Okay? The second law of thermodynamics is acting on us. So let me close in prayer, and I'll turn it over to Al. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come and learn about why you do exist. We've only covered one of the three arguments, and there's more even to cover on this. We thank you that you've given evidence, and we thank you that this evidence simply points to you. And if we don't want to miss that. We want to realize that this evidence is just a pointer. It's not something that we worship. It's not something that is the center of our attention, but it's a pointer to you. And I pray now that you would help all of us to take this evidence this week and apply it somewhere, to some unbeliever or to somebody who's struggling, to somebody out there who needs encouragement, that thinks maybe God doesn't exist. Pray that you be able to give these folks here and give myself the ability, the wisdom, the knowledge to go out and do that this week. I thank you in Christ's name. Amen.